Hey guys, welcome back to Sarah's Vegan Kitchen. I hope you're doing well. I got such a positive response to my previous video where I tested out 2 chicken-style seitan recipes. So I thought today we'd do another seitan recipe test. We're finally going to be trying out the washed flour seitan method, which I believe went viral originally on TikTok. And if you're not familiar, this is like the OG method of making seitan. You take regular all-purpose or bread flour, make a dough out of it, and then you repeatedly rinse and knead it under water so that you wash away all the starch and all you're left with is the gluten, the pure protein. I actually tried this a decade ago, back when I was vegetarian in college. Vegan meat alternatives were not nearly as mainstream, and it was actually kind of difficult for me to find Vital Wheat gluten in stores. You had to order it. So I wanted to try it out using just all-purpose flour. I was not a success. I'll leave it at that. So I was a little bit hesitant to try it out again, but I kept seeing it everywhere, so I thought let's just dive in. And now that I've made it, I can say it's not nearly as much of a hassle as I thought it was going to be. So if you're kind of on the fence about trying it out, I recommend just doing it. It's a fun weekend project. If nothing else, if you have kids, you can get them involved. And I filmed my experience making it for the first time, and I used the recipe and the methodology outlined by Lisa from the Vegan. She has both a YouTube channel and a recipe blog, and she made a detailed guide about the washed flour seitan method on both. So I'm going to link the video down below. It's a great resource if you want to try it out. And yeah, I'm just going to dive into my experience making it and let you know whether I think if it's actually worth the extra effort compared to seitan you just make using Vital Wheat gluten. I started out, of course, by measuring my flour. I did use a digital scale just for ease of cleanup, but you can totally measure by volume. And again, I'm going to have the recipe linked down below that I followed from the Vegan blog. Then you pour in your water. And you can totally do this by hand. It's just going to take a little bit of elbow grease, but I'm using my stand mixer because I'm lazy. And I started out with the paddle attachment just to bring everything together. And as you can tell, it is a huge amount of dough. So it was even a little difficult for my stand mixer to process. But once the dough started to come together, I switched out to my dough hook and allowed that to do the kneading for me. And I didn't film this, but I did end up splitting the dough into 2 separate batches and kneading them separately just to make it a little bit easier on my stand mixer's engine. And you can see the dough go from kind of rough and shaggy to really smooth and elastic, and it should spring back when you poke it, and that's how you know it is ready. Then I added enough water to cover my dough ball in my bowl, and I allowed it to rest. I have read that you need to let it rest a minimum of 30 minutes. Over an hour is even better. I just kind of went about my day, and I think I remembered to come back to it about 2.5 hours later. You're just giving the dough an opportunity to rest. It allows the gluten and the starch to expand and become fully hydrated. I ended up transferring my dough and water to a larger bowl so that it would be easier for me to knead and kind of show you the texture. And what you're going to do is just start kneading that dough underwater to gradually rinse off the starch from the gluten. I kind of ended up developing a technique, and you'll see that as I go along, but I first started out by just trying to knead it as I would usually knead bread dough, by kind of folding it over on itself. Then as time went on, I realized it was actually more efficient to knead the dough like a cat does, so I was just squeezing it in my hands, allowing the dough to go through my fingers, and this worked really well. And you'll see the water becomes extremely opaque and milky, and at this point you're going to want to pour off that starchy water, and you can save this. I'll talk a little bit about uses for the starch water later. Add some fresh water to cover and continue the process. I found this to be so satisfying, actually, just to see how the dough continuously transformed. And you can see how the gluten strands start to become more and more apparent the more starch you wash off. I would recommend using the absolute largest bowl you have in your kitchen. The bowl I was using was actually not that large, so if I had been able to use a larger bowl, I would have been able to add more water and then do fewer washes. But because I was working with such a small volume of water, I did have to pour it out quite a few times. The first time I tried out this process, I ended up stopping my washing at the stage where my gluten looked like this. I thought that it was done, but you'll see later. I think I needed to give it one more additional wash. But once you have your gluten ball, you allow it to rest. I think, again, I let it go for like 2 hours just because I got sidetracked. But this gives the gluten an opportunity to relax, and then you can stretch it out really far. And another thing that I decided to do a little bit differently the second time around was stretch my gluten further and knot it more tightly. So more tightly than you're seeing here. Then I just followed the instructions for cooking it on the Viet Vegan blog post. I used a few of these chickenless bouillon cubes. And you can see the first time around, it swelled up a lot in my pot. And it's normal for seitan to kind of swell up when you're cooking it. It does expand, but I'm realizing that because I didn't wash it thoroughly enough, it had more bubbles in it and more air in it than it was supposed to. I allowed it to cool, I refrigerated it, and then this is what it looked like the following morning. Now it looks on camera like it resembles shredded chicken, but if you kind of zoom in, you'll see that for this first batch, there are a lot of tiny little bubbles in there, and it has a pretty spongy texture. I decided to try it again to try to achieve the kind of texture that I saw in Lisa's video and in a lot of the other videos that I had watched on TikTok. I ended up cutting the recipe in half this time because I just didn't want to use as much flour, and also I didn't really want that much seitan just hanging around in my fridge. So I made it again, followed the same exact procedure. I just washed it extra. This time it came out much firmer. Unfortunately, now I had the opposite problem because I found it to be really rubbery. The way I describe this is kind of like if you've ever had scallops or like shrimp that has been really overcooked and it's very tough and springy. That's kind of what was happening for me here when I made it properly. And I actually had kind of a difficult time shredding it this time around because it was so firm. So what I ended up doing actually was just chopping it up, and I thought, okay, this kind of resembles like chopped up steak that you'd get in like a street taco. So I thought, let's use the carne asada marinade that I usually use with soy curls on this, and then we will pan fry it and try to get a nice char on there, and maybe it'll kind of pass as like vegan steak. And we enjoyed it a lot more this way. Eric especially really liked it. It reminded me of if you've ever gone to the Asian market and in their canned food section, you can buy like mock duck, mock abalone, all sorts of interesting vegan meat and seafood alternatives. I have tried a few different kinds and I never really liked them. I thought it was the broth they come in. I thought that was what was making it taste weird. Now I'm realizing it's just the flavor of the seitan, which is so weird because one of the selling points I kept hearing about trying out this method was that it was had less of a bitter flavor than seitan you make from vital wheat gluten, that it was more neutral, more of a blank canvas. I don't know if I agree. I don't know what exactly it is, but it definitely has a distinctive smell. You're gonna want to use it in something very saucy or with a lot of seasoning. I made taco crumbles with the first batch because I didn't want to eat it shredded because it was so spongy. So I ended up putting it in my food processor and just processing it until it resembled ground meat. It actually ended up just kind of looking like TVP at this point, and I was able to really sear off a lot of that extra liquid and kind of firm it up in the pan. I added on a crap ton of taco seasoning and it was pretty good. All the other components in the tacos masked the flavor for the most part. So I feel like I'm not selling it super well, even though I said that it's definitely worth a try. So I would say it's worth a try because it's a really fun process and it yields a result that is definitely edible. Okay, I don't have any regrets making it. It was super satisfying kneading the dough and seeing it transform. But will I add this into my regular rotation like I said I was going to do with the chickweed recipe in the previous video? No. I've actually seen a few variations on it that you guys have sent me on YouTube where people will add in other like sauteed mushrooms or pureed beans and tofu, and it apparently improves the texture, and you can add in different seasonings and make things that look kind of like freakishly similar to real meat. So I'll try to find some of those and link them down below if you're curious. But yeah, that's my 2 cents on this matter. Thank you so much for watching this video. Thanks to all of you who requested it. If you have any other video requests, leave them in the comments down below, and I'll see you in my next video.